Clutter is nothing more than a series of deferred decisions stacked on top of each other.
Are you ready to organize mindfully?
Get ready to be inspired to bring organization into your life by hearing from professional organizers, designers, mindfulness teachers, and people who are living an organized life. Here's your host, Mark Dillon.
Hello, OM team. Welcome to today's episode of Organize Mindfully. Today on the podcast, Andrew Mellen is here, and he will be speaking with us about how we can organize mindfully. This podcast is brought to you in part by listeners just like you. Go to organizemindfully.com/OM team. That's OMTEAM. And you can join others who are supporting this podcast. Your support is greatly appreciated, and I love when new people come in and join the OM team. At the end of this interview with Andrew, I want to come back and take just one segment of what Andrew spoke about and go into it in more detail with you as a way that you can start incorporating it into your daily life. If you are a regular listener to the Organize Mindfully podcast, my guess is that you've noticed a theme that comes up often when I ask a guest, where do you struggle when it comes to organizing? Quite often, the guest will reply, it comes to time. People just don't have enough time, and it often gets in the way of allowing us to organize the things in our life. So let me ask you, how are you doing with time? Do you find that it's a roadblock for you to accomplish the organizing that you want to do? Do you find that you have plenty of time and it actually isn't a struggle for you? Well, this is something that I've been giving a lot of thought to, and I'd love to hear from you. If you go to organizemindfully.com and select the contact page, I'd really enjoy hearing from you on your thoughts around time and organizing. Have you had some great successes? Do you have questions, or are there areas that you yourself are struggling with? I'd like to take these questions and thoughts, and I'm working on a project that I'll be bringing forth in the coming months. So for now, though, let's have a listen to this interview with Andrew. Today on the podcast, Andrew Mellen is here, and he is an organizational expert, speaker, and best-selling author of Unstuff Your Life. His message is simple: get rid of clutter, and everything opens up. For 18 years, he has maintained a private practice of working one-on-one with individuals as well as with groups and businesses. He is passionate about organization, sustainability, and transformation. Andrew, are you ready to organize mindfully?
Always, Mark.
Excellent. Well, I've shared a little bit about you and about your business, but please tell us more and also what you've been up to most recently.
Well, most recently I've been working on a project for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm working with their conservation department to reorganize those 3 floors at the Metropolitan Museum, which is a tremendous... I sound, I think, less enthusiastic than I am. It's a dream job for me. I have a long background working in the arts, and this opportunity to spend time with them and backstage at the Met, if you will, it's tremendous. It's mind blowing. I'm so honored and humbled to be of use to them in that way. So.
I often think of organization as an art itself. So in a sense, you are really combining an entire world here.
Yes, I, again, as somebody who worked for many years in the theater, it feels a surprisingly natural extension of the work I did as a director and writer and producer to now be working with individuals one-to-one, as well as training and working one-to-many in public venues. It's often surprisingly similar to me, the work.
Well, Andrew, let's get into how you see organization and how you organize different things. So when you do have something that needs to be organized, what's the first thing that you do?
Well, Mark, I created the organizational triangle, which is one home for everything, like with like, and something in, something out as the three guiding principles I use whenever I'm organizing anything at home, at work. So the first thing that I will do is typically group like things together, because that's going to give me the clearest understanding of the volume of things I'm dealing with. So whether it's cables that need to be containerized, or books, or papers, or receipts, the first thing I want to do is actually get everything together that belongs together so that I can see it, and then I'll start to, within that clump of stuff, start to make any sort of subgroups or subcategories that need to be made, and then I find a home for those things. So it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple.
What I like about that is we often think of organizing as it's going to be this big, huge process, but to keep it in a simple system makes perfect sense. It's a reduction of clutter on steps on how to organize, in a sense.
Yeah, I think if it isn't simple, nobody will do it. I do it because I have a passion for it, because it's my source of income. It makes sense to me, but when I am teaching people, I shouldn't say but, I should say and, when I'm teaching people, when I'm working with people, the focus of the work that I do with them is simplifying it. It's always getting it down to its most basic steps, because what I have learned over the 18 years that I've been doing this work is that anything that is complicated will, when you run into an obstacle in doing something, you're going to drop it and you're going to go back to old bad behavior, even if it isn't efficient, even if you know from experience that it doesn't serve you. You'll still pick it up, because in that desperate moment you'll think, this is too difficult to sustain. I'm going to go back to what I know how to do, even though I know it isn't the best choice, because it's familiar and easy. And then when I, quote, have time, I'll go back to this more complicated system and pick it back up again, which is never going to happen. So it's essential that we get it as simple as it can possibly be, because that's what's going to sustain you when you hit those bumps in the road, which you will inevitably hit. You will run into an obstacle that you did not anticipate, and at that moment, you're going to be, at that juncture, you're either going to hold on to the new skill, or you're going to drop it and pick up an old bad skill.
So, Andrew, you said in there that your passion for organizing, and I'm curious, what do you think it is that makes you great at organizing?
What makes me great at organizing is my compassion for human beings, my desire for simplicity, and a tremendous dissatisfaction with the way that the world looks today.
So you just want to get the world in order, in a sense.
Well, what I'd like to do, I'm not so full of myself that I think I'm going to get the world in order, but what I'd like to do is help everybody else get the physical obstacles and clutter out of their way so that they can get the world in order. I think so much time is wasted with inanimate objects that do not reciprocate our affection. They do not. We are having these one-sided relationships with things, and it's a complete distraction from intimacy and any sort of meaningful encounter on the planet. So the more I can help people remove those physical obstacles between them and intimacy means greater civic participation. It means greater relationships with the people that you love. It means greater participation in your communities, at your schools, where you work. You're less distracted by crap, and you're more engaged in the things that actually matter to you. So the quicker we can get to that place in your life, the more engaged you will be, and by extension, the sweeter the world will be for all of us.
Well, I love this because we are thinking alike. So I'm really excited here because I agree with you 100% that so often we get caught up with the clutter and the things and the, as you say, the objects that don't do anything back or give anything to us in a sense. And they just distract us or get in our way of those connections, those relationships, and living a life that we really want to live that can contribute to the world and to ourselves and the people around us.
Exactly. There's no sense in deferring a moment of joy or happiness to nobody wants to sit at home on a beautiful sunny day, or for that matter, a miserable rainy day, and sort paper. Who would choose to do that? Nobody would ever choose to do that. So the quicker we can get you in a place where your papers make sense to you and keeping track of them, which is on some level necessary if you live in Western culture and you have paper and things. But the quickest route to the other side of whatever it is that you need to be organizing is the goal.
So, Andrew, looking back, what do you think it is, or where do you feel at times you struggle when it comes to organizing?
I would say for me, just like most people, it's about time. The stuff itself is not a challenge for me. It's not like I've always been organized or I was born organized, which I think is another one of those myths that people, I don't know where that comes from, but people seem to think, oh, I don't have that organization gene. I don't know who. Nobody's born organized. I mean, first of all, you're born with nothing, so there's nothing to organize. If you're mindful about the things that you bring into your life, keeping track of them should be pretty simple. For me, as I said, like for most people, I just want more time. I want more time to do the things that I love and less time required for the things that I don't love. I don't love paperwork, but I do like knowing how much money I have in the bank. I like paying my bills on time. I like saving money for, I suppose, retirement, for the things that I want to do so that I can take a vacation. I can buy people I love gifts, so that I can enjoy a degree of comfort, although I will say that I think comfort is overrated. So I don't think that I think we have a big skewed perspective on how comfortable we need to be in any given moment. So
yeah, and we live in a world where we want it, and we want it now, and we want it exactly as we want it.
Yes. It's the source of deep pain and frustration, I think, in many people's lives. That unwillingness to accept what is actually happening and surrender the delusion that they're holding on to of how they think things ought to be, based typically on story. Not based on reality at all. It's based on a narrative that they've been carrying around for a certain period of time, perhaps from childhood, that is driving so many of their choices and their reactions to what's going on around them.
Yeah, and even when it comes to organizing, looking at various things online of these picture-perfect photographs of how our life should look and how our bedroom should look and our kitchen and our closets, that it sets us up so many times for just failure, because that's perfect for the photo shoot. But the reality is somebody needs to live in that space too.
Certainly. What I will say, there's no doubt that shelter magazines and websites show us an idealized world. Having said that, I will also say that if you want a simple life, make simple choices. It is that easy. It's just a lot of people want a lot of stuff. They want those creature comforts, and understand that everything that everything that you bring into your life is one more thing you are assuming stewardship over. So again, I encourage your listeners to be very mindful about everything that they bring into their life, because you are going to become responsible for that from cradle to grave. So you might think that you want it in the moment, but if you think it all the way through, well, what does it really mean to bring this new printer home? What does it mean to upgrade my computer? What does it mean I have to harvest the information off my old computer? I now have to recycle the old computer. I have to configure the new computer, all of which might make perfect sense, but you want to budget enough time to do that and be mindful and aware about how long it's going to take you and when you're going to actually schedule the time, so that you don't just do the knee-jerk thing, which is get the new machine, open it up, rip it out of its package, start playing with it, and then throw the old machine in the closet thinking, quote, someday I'll harvest the photos and the files off that computer. But for now, I just want the pleasure of the new toy, and I'll deal with the consequences of the old toy later, but later never arrives. So then you just create some clutter for yourself. And it's worth saying, I say it all the time, clutter is nothing more than a series of deferred decisions stacked on top of each other. So you can scan your home, your office right now and look around, and the piles that are laying there, they're just deferred decisions. It's the beautiful thing about getting organized, is that all you have to do is make either a series of decisions about those objects, or you can make one global decision, which is, I don't really care anymore what is in this pile. I haven't touched it for 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, and the quality of my life will not be negatively impacted by letting it go. So I'm just going to recycle it all. This is where story comes in. It's likely in that moment of that epiphany of, aha, I could let it all go, is story intrudes, and story says, wait. There might be a few gems in there, and I have to harvest those gems first, and then I can let everything go. What you have to recognize is that is just narrative. You have no idea what's in that pile. And it's as likely to be nothing meaningful as precious items. If it isn't the deed to your home, if it isn't the title to your car, if it isn't your great-grandmother's antique wedding ring, if it isn't one of those kinds of objects, chances are it's a recipe for lemongrass creme brulee that you printed off the internet 3 years ago thinking you were going to make it for a holiday dinner that you never did. That can easily go in the recycle bin. It's not going to negatively impact the quality of your life one iota.
Well, let's get into a worst organizing moment that might be a professional organizing moment that you were involved with, or maybe even something from your own life. But do you have a situation that you could share where you were really dealing with a lot of disorganization?
Well, I don't really have that in my personal life. I'm pretty tidy. Moving is the only thing that I can think of on a personal level that is challenging for anybody, and certainly for me as well, just because it is an opportunity to literally touch every single thing you own and get really clear about, wow, I still have this. Why do I still have it? What's the story there? How is it serving me? Do I want to spend the money and the time packing it up and relocating it one more time? Am I going to use it in the new home? Did I use it in my current home? Did I use it in the last home? So I would say that moving house, it is a grand scale organizing moment. And I would say, even, again, not to sound hubristic, but I've worked with hoarders, people that would have that clinical diagnosis. And even in those circumstances, it's really relatively easy for me to chart a path. The volume of stuff doesn't necessarily make it a worst case scenario. I think when I think of worst case scenarios, it's when I'm working with a client or an organization that is really bound up in story and unwilling to let go of anything. They are more attached to the narrative than they are to their own happiness. And that causes me deep pain and grief, both for myself in the moment of trying to work with them, and on a bigger sort of macro scale, the deep grief of witnessing somebody else's grief and being stuck and so intractable that you can witness in such an immediate way that they are generating their own frustration and grief, and are somehow powerless, seemingly powerless. I don't believe that they are powerless, but they believe themselves to be powerless to affect change in their life. I think that for me would be the worst kind of organizing experience.
So then maybe we can go from the worst to the best, and or just what I often think of, and as I hear you speak about it, maybe you can expand on this, of what I call like when you're in that zone where you're organizing and there's this flow, it's coming together. Could you share how that happens in your life?
When I think about being in the zone, it's really about forgetting myself and focusing on solving problems. What I know really excites me is when I'm teaching public classes or when I'm working in groups or even one-to-one, and there's that transmission of information, of skill, of tool to another, and you see the light bulb go on. You can see the quickness in their pulse when they really get it, when their aha moment happens and they go, oh, this makes so much sense. I don't know why this didn't occur to me before, but I totally get it. Now I can do this myself, and it's that transmission for me is really the sweet spot. So, problem solving is not, it's easy. It isn't difficult for me, and it's something that I do every day. So as I said, the sweet spot for me is really the transmission of the data, of the technology, of the technique to another, where you can see that they are now empowered to make positive, transformative change in their own life. That's there's nothing better.
In that, I'm wondering, do you see that by sharing these techniques in these ways, it allows people to focus on the specifics of this is what you do to organize, which then allows them to not get caught up in those stories? Because the stories, I think, often of the stuff that we're trying to organize is what can slow us down. And if I hear you right, you are saying that the stories are going to just really confuse us and really slow us down completely.
Yes, the narrative is always going to trip you up. And for me, calling out the story first is how you're going to set yourself free. I mean, we don't want to bring a lot of Buddhist philosophy into this conversation, only because I'm not a Buddhist teacher. I have a mindfulness practice, and I teach mindfulness, but I don't want to get lost in a lot of esoterica. So the only part of that I want to bring into it is that the delusion, the inaccuracy, the inability to see reality as it actually is occurring is why I think calling out the story first is more important in some ways than the skill set, because again, the organizational triangle is about as simple as you can make it. One home for everything, like with like, something in, something out. A 4-year-old can get that. So what you need to be able to recognize is, that's the story I've been telling myself about this object. That story doesn't mean anything to me anymore. It's the thing that's clouding my judgment. So I need to neutralize the story, and then it's easy to find a home for this object. It's either someplace in my home, or it's going to a thrift store, or I'm giving it to a friend, or I'm putting it out on the stoop with a sign that says free. The action to take on the other side of calling out the story is really easy to discern once you are disconnected or dispassionate about the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Actually, I hear you, because obviously this is organized mindfully, and so as a mindfulness practice, we notice the story arises. We don't go and fully engage and dive in, and the story becomes the whole world. We just notice that, this is an object. This was given to me by my grandmother. That touches my heart, and I can let this go, or it touches my heart enough that I want to keep it in my life.
Exactly. And you have to remember that whatever it is isn't your grandmother. That your affection and the connection and the love, and even possibly the loss if your grandmother is no longer here, that all of those things are not going to be diminished by that object leaving your life. You can access your deep affection for your grandmother at any time, in any moment. You do not need a fetish object to prompt that experience for you. And in fact, again, the object sometimes we make the object a surrogate for the experience. We charge the object with the responsibility of keeping the experience alive for us, and it's such a bad construct, because if and when that object fails, when it breaks, when it disappears, when something happens to it, we run the risk then of losing that experience, because we've charged the object with the responsibility of keeping the experience palpable and alive for us. So much better to find real living practice ways of keeping those relationships present for us, instead of making inanimate objects responsible for the quality of our life.
Andrew, what is the best advice you ever received?
Tell the truth.
It's nice, because then you don't have to worry about what you might have said.
Yeah, exactly. You don't ever have to remember who you told what to.
Do you have an internet resource or an app that you could recommend?
As far as web-based apps, we use Asana here in my office, and I think for task management, it's a great app. It's free for up to the first 30 users, which I think is tremendous, and I don't understand how they're monetized, but I think it's one of those things where it's a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. I don't really want to know how it's monetized, and I don't want their need for funding to somehow change how user-friendly the app is. But I think when it comes to organizing to-do lists, which in and of themselves are not time management tools, but they allow you to organize your thoughts around tasks you want to be doing, I find Asana really useful when it comes to organizing to-dos and tasks.
Now, Andrew, I know you are an author, and in addition to recommending your book, what's another book that you might recommend to the listeners, and why?
So in my life, and this is a running joke with a dear friend of mine, Tina, who loves superlatives. She's always asking, I mean, we laugh about it now. She's always asking, what was your favorite part about it? What did you like the least about it? And I'm so not a best and worst kind of person. So it's become a joke with us now, because she knows how uncomfortable on some level that question makes me. What I will say is, a friend and teacher of mine, Sharon Salzberg, wrote a book called Real Happiness, which I think is a great book. I think what I would rather say, as opposed to calling out specific titles, I would say Sharon as a writer is a great resource for me. Her first book, Faith, is an amazing book. Real Happiness, I think, is a tremendous work. The work of Anne Lamott really speaks to me. John Kabat-Zinn really speaks to me. So more than a particular title, it's if we call them thought leaders or thinkers, people in the world who are thinking about ways to be on the planet, I gravitate more towards the author, I think, than the individual title. I don't mean to be evasive in answering the question, but...
No, well, I appreciate that. And actually, I know Sharon really well. I'm the facilities manager for the Insight Meditation Society. And so Sharon, I can highly recommend her books, and she is fantastic. And I think, as you said, it's a way of thinking, in a way of seeing things that is what she's really putting out there. The specific book doesn't matter. Pick up one of Sharon's books, and you're going to win with that. Exactly.
And if you ever have the chance to go take a class or a workshop with her, she's such a generous teacher, and she's so down to earth, literally and figuratively. The way she approaches mindfulness and meditation, it's so accessible. There's no obstacle to sitting still with her, and the instruction is so clear and simple. It's why I enjoy spending time with her so much. I mean, as a friend, but then also as a teacher, because she makes mindfulness practice so accessible.
Yes, and stay tuned. Sharon is working on another book right now, and she said once that she gets that sent off to her publisher, she's going to be on the Organize Mindfully podcast and be talking with us about how we can use mindfulness and bring it into our organization, and how we can have the mindfulness in our life.
Excellent.
So, Andrew, this last question is kind of a catch-all, and you could think about it as a place that you are put into, or even a professional situation that you're coming in to help with somebody. But imagine that you need to organize an entire home that is in complete disorder currently. It needs to be ready for a big party, and just to throw a little more pressure on it, you're going to be the host of the party, so you really want to make sure the home is organized. If needed, you could spend $500 towards the organization in any way that you'd like. How do you bring the home into order in the next 30 days?
I would begin by grouping like objects with like objects. I would start walking through the entire house. I would create zones. So whether things remain in the kitchen or the living room or the bedrooms, I would start grouping like with like. So if things that belong in the kitchen are no longer in the kitchen, if there are things in the kitchen that don't belong in the kitchen, I would start grouping them like with like so that I could really understand what the quantity of things are in the home. And I guess what I would also say is that at the very beginning of the process, as I'm walking through the house, I'm always looking for the lowest hanging fruit. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove everything that I'm certain is garbage or recyclable and pull that out immediately and put it either in the recycle bin or in the garbage and get that out of the way, and then start grouping the like with like. And then drilling down into those individual piles. So if there's a bunch of papers, then we'll start to sort those papers. Again, internally, like with like. So credit card statements with credit card statements, invoices with invoices, insurance documents with insurance documents, books with books, magazines with magazines, catalogs, and those kinds of things go right in the recycle bin. There's no reason to hold on to anything like that. And so I would drill down into each of those categories, figuring out, okay, how many hot water bottles do we need? How many towels do we need? How many books do we need? How many serving platters do we need? Until we're down to the right number of things to fit into that physical space. The $500 I would probably spend on helpers. There's nothing, you don't need to go any place to buy anything to get organized until you're ready to containerize things, and never buy containers before you know what it is that you're putting in them. You will waste money and waste time, and you think that you will be doing something good for yourself. You won't be. The easiest thing to do is either get some boxes from a liquor store, or you can buy some cheap boxes, those folding file boxes from Staples. You can buy something like that just as temporary corrals for like objects. You can use laundry baskets, you can use playpens, you can use anything that has four sides and a bottom to corral like with like, so that you again are throwing a net around everything. Then you just drill down into it. So that's how I would approach it. It's pretty simple.
That's great. I like to make organization simple.
Yeah.
Andrew, you've shared a ton of valuable information with the Organize Mindfully listeners. What's the best way for them to reach out and stay in touch with you?
Join my mailing list. Visit my website, www.andrewmellen.com, and Mellon is spelled MELLEN. There's a free 5-day mini course that's available to anybody to sign up for. It's a 5-day mini course on organizing paper and getting the paper out of your life and getting it under control. So I encourage everybody to sign up for that. It's absolutely free. Email me at info@andrewmellen.com. Come to one of my public events. It'd be great to meet you. I'm always interested in supporting anybody's journey towards simplicity and happiness.
All of the ways to stay in touch with Andrew, as well as the recommendations that he made earlier, will be available for you on the podcast page at organizemindfully.com. Andrew, thank you so much for sharing everything you did today.
You're very welcome, Mark. Thanks for having me, and let's keep it simple.
What do you think, OM team? Wasn't that great to have Andrew as a guest today? I really appreciated how much he uses mindfulness with his organizing. And one of the topics that he suggested is one home for everything. And I'd love to go into that in more detail, because I've seen in my own life how much of a difference this has made over the years when it comes to my organizing. I've been interviewed many times, and one of the examples that I often use for one home for everything is my keys. Now, most of us have a set of keys, and so it's a simple thing that I think a lot of us can relate to. Before I had one home for everything, I would put my keys down wherever it seemed to make sense at the time. It might be on the countertop. It might be on a bureau. There could be many places that I could leave it. But what I was finding is the next time I went to get those keys, it was a struggle. Like, well, where are they? I remember carrying in the groceries, and I think I set the keys down. Have you ever had that moment? So what I did a number of years ago is I took a very simple, basic step. I put a hook right next to the door. So when I come in the house, one of the first things I do is I turn on the light and I immediately hang up my keys on that hook. The next day, when I go to actually get my keys, I know exactly where they are going to be. Now, like anything, it's not a foolproof system. There are times that I might be carrying in the groceries and I'm not able to just simply put my keys down. And so, yes, there will be times that they're not back on the hook the next time I go to look for them. But my guess is well over 95% of the time, I put my keys right back where I want them to be on that hook. So there's a simple example. Now, other things that we can actually do and how we can maintain this is just as important as having that simple system. So if you have a home for everything, how do you maintain that? Well, that takes a little bit of time, as any kind of organizing does. So in your daily life, one thing that I find really helpful is either at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day to do that quick little sweep around and to actually put things back that maybe have moved around during the past 24 hours. So you might find it works well for you at the end of the day to just walk through your space, and you'll notice that, this book got moved over here after I was done reading it. Put it back on its shelf or at its home. And you can do that very quickly when things are in order. It's an easy way to get things right back to where they need to be. Does that make sense? The key is really to do what works for you. If you have the energy and your mind is clear in the morning and you have the time to actually do that, that could be a fantastic opportunity right then and there. You might also find it easier at the end of the day because for some of us, we like to go to bed with less thoughts on our mind. And so it's a good time to kind of wind down and put things back in place and know that everything is back to where it needs to be so that the next day we can begin fresh and start all over again. Like any kind of organizing project, take it slowly. How about this? Over the next few days, find a home for 5 items. Make it simple. Just notice what works, where a good place would be for that item, and that will become its home. And start maintaining it over the next few days. You'll notice most likely that the items will move. Even if you live all by yourself, things have a way of moving around. You might in a moment pick up that item, use it, and then you don't put it back exactly where it's supposed to be. Realize that that's just a natural part of this, that things will move around. And so our role, or one of our goals, is to get things back to where we want them to be. And if we have a home for everything, it's so much easier for us to simply return it back to its home because there's less thought around it. If we know the keys are supposed to go on the hook next to the door, when they're not there and instead they're on the countertop, we know immediately, that needs to be on the hook. There's not a thought process around, well, where should I put that? Where will I remember that? Leaving ourselves Post-it notes that, I left the keys over here so that the next day when we want to run out, we can easily find them. Well, isn't it much easier instead of leaving ourselves Post-it notes and reminders all over the place, just to have a home for each item? So try this over the next few days in your life. Again, maybe pick 5 items that you can dedicate a home for. It's a great opportunity to bring in mindfulness, to bring in awareness. As you look for that home, take the time to just notice the item and think about, where would this best be kept? Where would I use this the most? And where's a good home for this? And then once you've taken that time to notice that and to really become aware of it, put it in that place. That becomes that object's home. And then see how it goes for you over the next few days. If you've decided that you want to keep the keys on a hook next to the door, and after a couple of days you're realizing this isn't the best place for it, perfectly fine. That's actually great that you've noticed that. Take the time then to decide, where would the best place be? Don't feel like it has to be permanent. It has to be the place. It has to be just right, because that's not necessarily the way that we want to go with this. We really ultimately want to find out what works best. And to find that out, it sometimes takes a correction or two along the way to tweak it, to get it just right. Understand that that is part of the process. That is normal. That's exactly as it should be. If you find a home for a place and it works out the first time to be the perfect home, congratulations. Enjoy that, because that maybe is more of an exception than the rule. And so as you go through and you're working with those 5 items, see how it works best for you. Take the time to actually find the best home for it, and then if you realize after a little more information that's not the best home, tweak it, rework it, find a better home. Sometimes it's just a little bit of a difference can make all the difference in the world. Let me know how it goes for you. Go to organizemindfully.com and stay in touch. Enjoy the moment. This concludes another episode of Organize Mindfully. You're an important part of this, and I really appreciate your commitment to listening. I hope today you found new ideas, inspiration, and that you now feel empowered to begin organizing the things in your life. Because if you do, I believe you can accomplish anything. Join me for the next episode when we will once again have an awesome guest. And in the meantime, go to organizemindfully.com and let me know how you're doing. Are you ready to organize mindfully?